So if you're not familiar with ITRC, ITRC is very similar to the Water Research Foundation. It is a state-led coalition of state agencies, environmental agencies, Department of Health representatives participate, and it's also a professional organization that you can join as a consultant, as a industry person, as a utility, as academia. And essentially what ITRC does is bring everybody together to work on technical guidance and tools to help departments of environment and departments of health better do environmental management. So ITRC had a big initiative on PFAS specifically, and it was really responding to the remediation cleanup sector, as well as to the Department of Health professionals that were dealing with PFAS, either from a cleanup perspective or it's in their drinking water or other type of water resource. So they developed this great technical guidance of PFAS treatment technologies and sampling and stakeholder point of views. So go check that out. In parallel, we developed a risk communication chapter on PFAS, which then led to the development of this risk communication toolkit. So we created a video to go over the toolkit that I'm just going to present to you in a moment, as well as what we were hearing from stakeholders about their needs and concerns, and some approaches to address that. So that is available to you on YouTube for free. So I keep talking about this toolkit, and essentially what it is a framework and process to guide a team, a utility, a municipality, anyone through developing a outreach strategy and messaging to accurately communicate your risk in a way that really meets your stakeholder needs and concerns. So as you can see on the right-hand side, it's not PFAS specific, right? Your first step is, what is your issue and concern? Then you set goals. We recommend setting SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, or relevant and timely. So you want to make sure that you can measure the success of your outreach and communication strategy. We don't want to just do like a data dump on people. So we want to set those goals up front. You want to identify the communities that you're engaging with and do an initial assessment of where do we have some burdened populations, disadvantaged populations that may be inadvertently burdened by the situation. Also, from the community assessment, you could look at news and social media to get a sense of what the community dialogue is around the environmental hazard that you're interested in, as well as reaching out to any stakeholder contacts. And once you get a sense of, okay, here's my outreach goal, here is the community dialogue, then you start identifying, these are the messages that we want to get out. So you identify your messages, then you identify which communication tools to get those messages out. And then after you go through those 6 steps, that's when you actually implement your strategy and go out and do your outreach, send out your materials, and then you want to evaluate and follow up. Did that strategy meet my objectives? Am I being successful in my communication, or do I need to refine the approach? So this toolkit that's available walks you through this process, gives a template to like fill out these sections. There's case studies where this was implemented, including for PFAS sites. And I'm gonna go to the next slide here, which highlights the resources that we have for each of these steps. So in step 1, we have an agenda for our first communication team planning meeting. Then we have examples of what PFAS specific communication SMART goals could look like. We then have in steps 3 and 4 actor mapping tools, so you can identify who your stakeholders are, but also map the relationship among those stakeholders with you as in your organization and agency, but also with each other. So there's an understanding of where there may be conflict or need for relationship building. In steps 5, we have a message mapping guide where we have specific examples that are PFAS specific. And a message mapping guide is essentially giving you guidance on how to develop a key message. So a key message is usually 3 sentences, 27 words, and takes no longer than 9 seconds to deliver. And what that is like your common first paragraph in a newspaper or the PR bit you hear on like the radio. So you want to get that key message up front so that the person who's the main point you want to get across is provided, and then you have that supplemental information following that key message. When people are stressed, they tend to have a very short attention span. So this is helping get out those key messages up front in your materials. And then also for those last steps, like I said, we have case studies. We have examples of centralized information repositories. So essentially web-based GIS mapping platforms and data dashboards that were created for PFAS sites. Community education. So Bennington College in Vermont had a introduction to PFAS class for their community to help the community feel more educated about the cleanup efforts that were going on within their community. They were a community that was impacted within the Hoosick Falls site where their water resource was greatly impacted. And it was a safe place for the community to ask questions and actually do some additional testing that they were interested in that the state wasn't able to fund at the time. We also have example result letters, press releases, a vision board to help get community feedback as to what their needs and concerns are. There's also a public information sheet around how to read an analytical data package. So if you're sampling somebody's private well and you're providing them with that data package, we have a fact sheet to help them understand what that is. And then also a media tracking form. So that's all what we have in ITRC. And like I said, there's a lot of PFAS examples, but even if you're not into PFAS, this is a really great resource to check out. After ITRC put all that material together, the Water Research Foundation project kicked off. And this was specifically focused on supporting the drinking water, wastewater sector professionals, either from a utility perspective or a municipality perspective. The driver was behind the UCMR 5 testing that a lot of states and municipalities were going to have to start participating in, especially if they didn't have state standards. And I do recognize in California that you do have state standards, so a lot of this testing is already underway. But this WRF project initially was set up to help respond to this next set of testing. but we developed a lot of great products and tools that can be used outside of the UCMR 5 sampling. So we put together some really great best practices and guidance on how to do effective communication between water and wastewater utilities. Developed a bunch of materials to help support reporting on the UCMR5 sampling data. And we provided different scenarios in terms of, do your results come in below, at, or above your state standard or the federal standard, depending upon what state you're in. So we tried to come up with all the different scenarios that states may experience. And then also a compilation of educational materials for the public, focusing on not just water sources, but also how it links to their tap, the aspect of biosolids and residuals that are generated during treatment processes also play a role in PFAS distribution within our environment. And that's where this PFAS cycle that I mentioned before really plays in as a communication tool. And we'll bring up an example of that in just a second. So if you're interested in these toolkits, here's a QR code on the right-hand side here. You can also just like Google WRF One Water Toolkit, PFAS Toolkit. The UCMR5 toolkit, I'm not going to go into detail because we're talking to everyone who's in California, and you guys have standards and been sampling and reporting on these results for quite some time. But the One Water Toolkit is, I think, very useful because it's to really tap into how individuals understand and perceive their risk to PFAS, and understand actions utilities can take, but also actions they can take as well. So this toolkit has the PFAS cycle brochures, a product information and certification resource. So I'll bring up both of those items. They also have templates for a PFAS website. So it has like a nice template foundation that you can download and, update, revise, and make it into your own PFAS website. They have letter and emails to customers. They created bill inserts and also social media inserts. So just trying to provide language for water utilities that are common, right? And reach the consensus. So if you're not familiar with how WRF works, there is a pack of advisors, like an advisory committee that's comprised of utilities and municipalities. So even though I was working on this as CDM Smith, Hazen was working on it, and the American Waterworks, American Water was also a big supporter and PI on this. We want to a discussion that we had was that it's important to have consistent messaging nationally. People are accessing social media, they're talking to each other. States that are surrounding California are asking, why don't we have standards? Why isn't sampling occurring? What does it mean when I have PFAS in my water? If we're not having consistent messaging as a national utility group or sector professionals, then we're going to end up with like a society who's getting different types of messaging, and we'll start comparing their experience with the experience in other states, which happens. It's happening now. So this was an attempt to formalize it and come up with consensus, consistent messaging so that we start having a national message. This is an example of the product information and certification resources that we put together. So you can see On the left-hand side, there's, what the resource or the organization, institution was, a summary of the types of consumer products that that institution focuses on to determine whether or not PFAS is present in those products, those consumer products. What the criteria is, right? When you see the word PFAS free, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different institutions. It could be PFAS free to a specific number. It could be PFAS free for only 3 types of PFAS that they're testing. So it's really important to understand what is meant by PFAS free. So we tried to summarize that in here, along with other considerations and notes, and have links to these resources as well. So for the PFAS cycle, this is an example brochure in the One Water Toolkit. In the next slide, I'm going to show you one that we built for an actual community, so you can see how this overall kind of watershed brochure can be used to make something that is more community specific. But what we're trying to get across here is that PFAS are present in common household consumer products, right? So if you start at the top on the figure on the right-hand side, if you go down the left side, it's entering, we're being exposed as humans because we're using products, we're eating, we're drinking with, wrappers that may be lined with PFAS, we're wearing certain clothes. So we are getting exposed ourselves just from utilizing these products. And then on the right-hand side, it's also like industry is also producing these products and has a waste stream that has now entered the environment. So both of these mechanisms are contributing to PFAS not only entering our bodies, but entering the environment. And then when it enters the environment, it also enters our bodies. So this was like a high level watershed perspective. And then this is taking it to a community level. And we did this for the island of Nantucket. They are an island. So they wanted to map how PFAS is moving throughout their island to help communicate to the residents, the visitors, how they themselves play a role in the presence of PFAS. There's no industry here on the island. So PFAS came in 2 forms. One, let's see if I can see if I have a pointer. Nah, I don't think I can figure it out that fast. So we have in the upper left corner, the residential commercial use of products, right? When we use those products, it gets into our waste stream. So if we fall down the left-hand side, it enters our wastewater treatment facility. And then if I keep following that down a little bit to the right, it then enters our solid waste management facility, could get into leachate. That landfill is online, so then it got into the groundwater. In addition, they were using biosolids for compost, so the compost was then being impacted, and that compost was being used for soil and gardening and eating. They have since stopped using that for compost, but that's just one mechanism of how it got into the local environment. And then on the bottom left-hand side is like the use of aqueous firefighting foam, AFFF, that also has PFAS in it, Class B firefighting foam. An application of that foam has led to impacts in groundwater, which then resulted in their irrigation wells and their water aquifer potentially being impacted. So It's telling the story of how PFAS moves throughout the environment so that we can give a few key messages. One, you as a consumer play a role in PFAS in the environment. And if we use less of these products, then less of it's getting into our environment. The second message is wastewater, drinking water, utilities are receivers of PFAS impacted material. You're not creating the problem, you're not generating the problem. You're getting it via use of these products is in your waste stream, or your drinking water source was impacted, either by an industrial application or an application of Class B foam. So it helps take that direct target of the utilities and educate the public in that the utilities have been almost dealt this issue and problem, and that you guys are doing the best you can to move forward with addressing it. And then lastly, again, these are just my personal considerations that I'm sharing from my experience, that maybe water reuse is an opportunity to avoid PFAS and other emerging contaminants if you have a water source that's impacted. So maybe there's a benefit to using reused water to avoid those water quality issues. On the flip side, any water source should be tested and treated, right? So if you are using water for water reuse, don't assume it's PFAS free. Make sure that you test it and treat it. I know a lot of water reuse tends to have pushback, especially from a drinking water perspective, right? There's the toilet to tap aspect that's always going on for the public. And there's a tendency to want to purchase bottled water. We have this perception as a society that bottled water is like safer than our tap. And a message to get out is that states are finding PFAS in bottled water. And there's plenty of states like New Hampshire and Massachusetts that actually have their bottled water testing publicly available. And that bottled water is not regulated by the Drinking Water Act. It's regulated by the USDA under Food and Agriculture. So there's different standards being applied, and the public just doesn't understand that. And I think building that faith back into what's coming out of your tap is aligned with the Drinking Water Act and the standards that are being set is a good message to hopefully try to get away from the reliance on bottled water. Water reuse helps maintain a healthy community water cycle, especially for areas that are water stressed, right? We don't want to keep extracting from our environments. And perhaps that PFAS cycle can be a way to also communicate that water cycle aspect. And then lastly, water reuse has a lot of benefits, right? There's a lot of environmental and water stewardship benefits that need to be communicated to get their buy-in. I'm sure this group are professionals on that. One metric that we've been looking into more and more when it comes to water reuse and reclamation that I want to share is the value of water. So if you start doing water reuse reclamation, what is the value of that new water source that you created? Well, if you're not taking water out from Lake ABC, that's the value. So if you can identify a natural capital value for that water source, so the recreational value, the value of having an ecosystem and habitat, right? Monetizing the value of that water source, like dollars per acre foot, you can then say, well, we're not taking from that natural resource anymore. we're replacing it with the reused water, and here's the monetized benefit of that water that's being reused to help communicate to the public the benefits of that. This is an exercise we do a lot with GHG and carbon emission reductions, where we apply the social cost of carbon and highlight those monetized benefits. So we could do something very similar for water reuse. So that's my presentation, and I think I have maybe a couple minutes for questions, and I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Mel. Great presentation and information. So definitely, if there's any questions, please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask, or put them in the chat. Not yet. Okay, so maybe at the end. So I guess what we can do now is after Mel, we're going to have Jason Dadakis present. So Mel, maybe at the conclusion of Jason's, everyone will have a little bit more time, but you're getting some positive comments, great presentation and toolkit resources. So thank you so much for sharing it with this group. So I would like to introduce Jason Dadakis from the Orange County Water District. He is the Executive Director of Water Quality and Technical Resources. He's worked here for 9 years. He is responsible for overseeing laboratory testing, monitoring programs, permitting, regulatory compliance, scientific investigations, and applied research in support of OCWD's groundwater management activities and recycled water projects. So as you all know, Orange County Water District has been significantly impacted by PFAS, and we have addressed it in a very proactive manner with a really robust program. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Jason.
Thanks, Gina. Thank you for the introduction, and yeah, really appreciate the invitation from the Communications Collaborative Group to speak with you all today and share our experience with both our management and communication strategies we've employed down here in Orange County to help us manage PFAS. So just a quick outline of my talk. I'll just give you a little bit of background about OCWD and PFAS, and then kind of talk about two main areas. First, our response to the PFAS on our local groundwater supply and how we responded to that, and some of the challenges we've had there, and how we've attempted to overcome those. And then trying to shift and make this a little more reuse centered, talk about how we're managing PFAS in both our potable reuse project down here, the groundwater replenishment system that many of you are familiar with, and then just some thoughts on managing PFAS and non-potable reuse as well. And then at the end, I'm going to turn it back over to Gina, who's really led our PFAS communication strategy effort here, and she will share some of that with you to close us out. So just real quick, Orange County Water District at a glance. We're celebrating our 90th anniversary this year. We're an independent special district formed by the legislature, really with the mission to manage and protect the Orange County groundwater basin. That's important because 85% of our local water supply comes from the groundwater basin, which is somewhat unique for Southern California, where most areas are more reliant on imported water. Our major stakeholders are 19 cities and retail water districts in our North and Central Orange County service area, which is comprised by 2.5 million residents. We're governed by a 10-member elected board of directors. And we also play a role in protecting the county's rights to the San Ana River. So water PFAS, I won't spend much time on this. This group is sure very familiar with this. But essentially, this is a large family of compounds we've been hearing about increasingly, certainly the last several years, that have this common carbon-fluorine bond, which imparts the resilience to these molecules. First developed in the 1930s and 1940s. And they have some useful properties, right? They impart non-stick properties, water resistance, stain resistance, oil resistance, fume suppression. They're really good at putting out jet fuel fires. But as we're finding more and more, they have adverse consequences once they're released in the environment, and also to human health. And so they're becoming increasingly regulated in media such as drinking water. So as Mel alluded to in her talk, California does at least have drinking water advisories for PFAS established by the State Board's Division of Drinking Water. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. These have come out starting in 2019. They seem to kick out about one of these per year. So you can see them listed here for PFOA, PFOS, PFBS, and PFHXS, for PFAS commonly found in the environment. And you can see the notification level listed here. That is the threshold at which if PFAS is detected in water served to the public, that the local governing body needs to be notified by the water utility. That's typically the local city council, or in an unincorporated area, the board of supervisors. That's simply just notification that that this threshold has been exceeded, and that the state has some interest and is kind of beginning to think about regulating these formally. The response level, like the higher threshold here, this is the threshold at which the state really recommends that a drinking water source be taken out of service. And this response level actually got some extra teeth in a bill that was passed specific to PFAS, I believe in 2019 or 2020, that should a utility, decide or, be compelled to continue serving water above a response level, they essentially have to do what's known as a tier 2 notification of their customers, which is essentially equivalent to a violation in terms of, billing inserts, newspaper advertising, even going on local radio, just a pretty broad broadcast that the utility is serving water above a threshold at which the state does not recommend. And so that's a pretty bright line for most utilities in California, certainly in our service area down in Orange County, that if a source exceeds that response level, it immediately comes offline. And just for folks to be aware that the state is continuing to develop these. Again, the state board working with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or WEHA. At the bottom, you see 5 additional PFAS listed here. The state board has requested from WEHA recommendations on these remaining 5. And we expect the next one, PFHXA, to be released, at least the recommendation from WEHA to be released later this year. The the state board then has their own process to translate that into a formal notification and response level. And one final thing here before I leave this, the notification levels also have relevance to water reuse in California, as for potable reuse projects like groundwater recharge or surface water augmentation. If a notification level is exceeded in the finished water, the state board requires that the project owners begin to investigate that and increase their monitoring and figure out why that's happening. And so they do come into play in the water reuse here as well. So back to OCWD. So under these advisory levels, based on the occurrence of PFAS in our basin through a lot of testing we've been doing, we've had 61 wells that have had to be taken offline for exceeding those one or more of those response levels. And there's a chance that number could increase, and I'll talk about why later. In aggregate, we estimate our cost to respond to this is going to be over $1 billion in terms of building treatment systems to remove PFAS from these wells and to bring them back online after they've shut down, and then certainly to operate them for that period. Also, the cost of having to import extra water, at least temporarily, while these wells are offline. We've had to work very closely with 11 retail agencies that have been impacted, having one or more wells taken offline due to PFAS. And we're in the process of building 39 total treatment systems to bring these 61 wells back online so they can serve local groundwater. And so in aggregate, this represents about 1/3 of our basin production being unaffected and potentially unavailable. So in terms of the district policy response to this, once we realized this was really coming to fruition with the state and these state advisories, our board established a policy whereas Orange County Water District would take the lead and fund 100% of the capital costs to build these treatment systems to bring these wells back online. And then once they're built, we would turn them over to the individual retailer systems to own and operate them. And then we'd share that operating cost. And this is, our incentives were aligned here. Our primary revenue source is essentially an assessment we pay on pumped groundwater. And so having people keep their wells offline for an extended period of time would create some financial challenges for our district. It also creates financial challenges for the retailers having to rely on the more expensive imported water for a longer period of time. Essentially, to our retail agencies, serving groundwater basically results is about half the cost, half the wholesale cost to them compared to purchasing imported water. So we're both very aligned in terms of wanting to restore our groundwater basin as quickly as possible. We're also able to get the support of our non-retail agency member non-affected retail agency members, folks that maybe their wells aren't affected by PFAS today, but they realize that they could be in the future, and so wanted to have eligibility for this program. So we've led the capital projects here. We've offered kind of turnkey service where we'll lead the project management and contracting in close cooperation and partnership with the retail agencies to build the facility that fits in with their system. And that's been very successful. We also offer the option that if a retailer had the resources and the wherewithal, the interest of sort of design and construct their own system, we'd be willing to reimburse them for that with our oversight. And finally, I do want to mention, I'm talking about the cost impacts of this. Yeah, we don't believe Orange County Water District or our impacted retailer should be on the hook for this. And so we've entered into cost recovery litigation for this back in December of 2020. And that actually is an important piece to our public messaging as well. So just a real quick snapshot where we are in our program in terms of impacted wells. We've actually been able to restore 30 of them. So of those 61, 30 are back online, operating with treatment. Another 22 in construction and 9 are in the design phase. And so this represents about a $300 capital investment to restore access to local groundwater. So shifting, I do want to mention that the pending federal regulations on this. I talked about the state. As many of you are aware, the US EPA proposed a national primary drinking water regulation for several PFAS this spring. You can see them listed here. Pretty much the usual suspects in terms of PFOA and PFOS being there. Cancer is identified endpoint there, and so their proposed maximum contaminant level that'd be an enforceable limit for all drinking water utilities nationwide is 4 parts per trillion. It is essentially at or very close to the practical laboratory reporting limit that laboratories like our own here in Orange County Water District and commercial labs will report data to you. And for the other 4 PFAS listed at the bottom of the table, there's an attempt to aggregate those into a single hazard index measure, kind of treating them as a mixture and measure them individually against their individual thresholds, but then adding that up to a hazard index methodology to essentially try to regulate them as a group. We expect this regulation, the public comment period closed earlier this year. We have our understanding is that this could be finalized by EPA as soon as December of this year to officially promulgate the rule. And then typically under the Safe Drinking Water Act, EPA allows water utilities 3 years to come into compliance. But EPA does have the discretion to extend that to, let's say, like a 5-year period, should they think that's necessary. And I know during the public comment period, many professional water associations and utilities were suggesting EPA that given the potential demand for treatment and just the feasibility of implementing it, that a 5-year period would likely be more realistic than a 3-year compliance period. So I just want to kind of just show this visually a little bit in our basin. Here's a map of our service area here in Southern California. And this shows the location of the 58 wells or 61 wells that are our treatment program right now. You can see where they're situated here. In reviewing our data and occurrence and a lot of the testing that's been going on in the basin, both voluntarily and also through state monitoring orders from the Division of Drinking Water, we have testing results at additional wells. And should that 4 part per trillion federal standard go into effect, this next graphic should kind of sort of shows kind of the potential expansion of those impacts. So it's really the wells in orange we've identified that their current testing results are below the state advisory, but we'd be above the proposed federal MCLs. We also have some other wells on the fringe, which also could be pulled into the program. And basically, if we were to continue it, add another 30 to 40 wells that'd be impacted that would likely enter our treatment program with that EPA regulation. So very significant impact to us, both cost-wise and operationally in our basin. Okay, so shifting kind of away from the groundwater and drinking water side of things, we did want to talk about reuse with this group, obviously. Just want to, many of you are familiar with our groundwater replenishment system. We operate here, large groundwater replenishment, recharge, and injection project. Been online since January 2008. We recently finished an expansion to it, our second expansion, such that it now produces 130 million gallons per day with that capacity. And we put this water back into the basin through a series of injection wells near our coast as part of a seawater intrusion barrier. Another small set of injection wells in the center portion of our basin. And then most of the water is sent up to the city of Anaheim, where we have a handful of dedicated basins, which allow this water to percolate rapidly into the subsurface. Through the final expansion, we're now recycling 100% of our partner, the Orange County Sanitation District's wastewater flow that's reclaimable. And, producing 130 MGD, we now, over the course of a year, can create enough water to sustain the needs for 1 million of our residents. So yeah, something we're very, very proud of. Treatment process here, this is sort of the classic California, treatment process that's required certainly for direct injection here and groundwater replenishment, really centered on reverse osmosis as the heart of our process, and then followed by ultraviolet light and hydrogen peroxide for disinfection and advanced oxidation. And so in terms of PFAS monitoring at the groundwater replenishment system, we started doing this back in 2017 when the analytical methods became more available and we could test at our in-house laboratory here. And this was voluntary. We began doing this back then. Eventually, around 2020, the state made that monitoring mandatory. And then more recently, 2021, we've started using kind of EPA's follow-on analytical method, EPA 533, which has 25 targets in it. Collectively, these two methods together are the UCMR5 methods that Mel talked about earlier that are happening nationwide for drinking water. We apply them here at our project as well for regular monitoring of our product water. And the good news is that, the product coming out of our reverse osmosis process and our finished water that's sent for injection and recharge are consistently non-detect for all 29 of these PFAS compounds we can test for. And this is good. This is somewhat expected. We know that given the properties of PFAS molecules, they should be really well removed by reverse osmosis, right? They're typically these typically large engineered molecules, and perhaps more importantly, they're charged, right? These are sulfonates, carboxylic acids, and once they're in water, they have a negative charge on them. And so RO is very good at removing charged molecules, being originally designed for removing salt. And so I think our project is further evidence that RO can be a really good treatment barrier for producing a PFAS-free water. I do want to mention PFAS has also kind of affected our neighbors and our partners at Orange County Sanitation District, who provide us the secondary treated wastewater to put through our advanced process. Like all publicly owned treatment works or wastewater plants greater than 1 MGD, they received a monitoring order from the state of California back in July of 2020 that compelled them to do 1 year of testing of kind of their raw sewage influent to their facilities, and then their treated effluent that they provide to us for recycling or otherwise discharge to the Pacific Ocean through their outfall, as well as their biosolids. And so they were prescribed a specific analytical method to do so. And so they've completed this testing. And so I just wanted to share with the group a little bit about what Orange County Sanitation District found on their part of the process. So not surprisingly, they do detect PFAS in their influent. This is sort of the raw sewage influent coming to their two plants here. And you can see they're finding usually a few hundred nanograms per liter of PFAS when you sum up the individual targeted species here, both at their plant number 1 and plant number 2, that with our final expansion, we now recycle water from both facilities. And in particular, they did find high levels of a sort of a modern PFAS, one of the replacement compounds known as 6,2-fluorotelomere sulfonate, or 6,2-FTS, you'll sometimes hear it referred to. And so they're actually actively kind of tracked down within their sewer shed, and especially amongst their industrial users, where this may be coming from. Next slide here on the left, this is sort of the treated water coming out of OC Sands process that becomes the influent to the groundwater replenishment system. And you can see here, not surprisingly, at least for our case, that you do find detectable PFAS in their secondary effluent here. But as I mentioned before, when we run it through the reverse osmosis process, we don't see it in our product water. Where does it end up? It ends up in the concentrate. Basically, in our case, that about 15% of the water that's rejected from the RO process, where all the dissolved contaminants end up, they do find it in the concentrate, and you can clearly see that here. That it's currently disposed of through OCCN's ocean outfall under the existing NPDES permit. But we have already begun conversations with them and just kind of looking at the long-term trajectory of PFAS regulation. We've begun some efforts to think about testing some ways of potentially removing it even from the concentrate before it's discharged to the environment. I did want to say, the occurrence of PFAS that was found at OCCN, and I'm sure many of the other wastewater plants throughout California, really wasn't surprising. The occurrence of PFAS in sort of this conventionally treated sewage and wastewater has been pretty well established in the literature. I just have a few papers up here from the last 15 or 20 years that show this. And so again, not entirely, not unexpected that you find this. Again, I think going back to Mel's nice talk, showing just that PFAS cycle. These compounds are so ubiquitous, used in so many consumer products, so many industries. It's not surprising that they end up in the sewer. And then understanding how resilient they are, and the fact that they don't biodegrade well, the fact that they're not removed by a conventional sewage treatment process, again, isn't very surprising. And so I think that makes it an issue that WateReuse is going to have to contend with into the future. Did want to touch on non-potable reuse briefly. This is, Orange County Water District actually has a small non-potable reuse system known as our Green Acres project. And then we also work closely with our retail member agency, the Irvine Ranch Water District, and their, very large, very successful non-potable reuse program they've had since the 1970s. So there are no regulations or real limits on PFAS in non-potable applications as of yet. Again, I mentioned the state board monitoring orders. Many reuse utilities, are also wastewater utilities, and so they receive these orders. So they now have some additional data on the occurrence of PFAS in their systems. And we are seeing as these wastewater and recycle water agencies have their NPDES permits renewed, if they have an environmental discharge, let's say to a local surface water, that PFAS, at least the requirement to test for PFAS following their monitoring orders is being added to all these permits as they come up. So that's kind of where the state is now, is they're formally requiring testing. In terms of potential drivers for additional regulation, beyond just testing, I think we see, things like, are these discharges, of the related reuse, are they impacting local groundwater, underlying groundwater? Are they having any effects on aquatic life and habitat? And are there any specific effects on, certain end users, customers, beneficial uses for non-potable reuse? I think I would foresee those be the questions that the state board, the regional board will start asking in the future as PFAS move along on their regulatory pathway. Do want to touch on the topic of PFAS uptake by food crops. As we know, non-potable reuse, agriculture irrigation is a significant use statewide. This isn't something we were very familiar with down here at Orange County Water District until we were asked in 2020 to talk about PFAS to the Orange County Farm Bureau. And we thought it'd be a good idea, not just talking about its occurrence in groundwater and in our recycled water, but the farmers are probably pretty interested in what happens with food crops. So our team here did a kind of a short literature review, reviewed 5 papers that had come out over the past decade. 3 studies specifically looking at the transfer of PFAS from water, soil to crop and tissues, and a couple others. And so I won't walk you through each paper. I'll just give you kind of the quick takeaways we got from them. Like many things, it can be somewhat a little complicated, but we found broadly that the uptake of crops of PFAS, depending on a number of factors. First is how much PFAS was there, right? Was there a lot of PFAS in the water? Was there a lot in the soil, or was it just a lower level, more of a background level? That was a driver of what showed up in the plants. The specific type of crop, and even the specific part of the crop that the PFAS would end up in, whether it was like, roots versus stems versus leaves versus fruit. And then even the specific, kind of PFAS. PFAS is a huge family of compounds that have different properties. And so, some of the shorter chain, smaller PFAS molecules were behaving differently in these experiments than the longer chain legacy compounds. And so the couple of takeaways I think I can report is that it does seem that, you would see greater uptake into these plants when the concentrations of PFAS in soil water were higher. In many cases where these studies would test kind of what was sort of in background drinking water or background even recycled water, they'd see minimal, if any, uptake. They would have to actually spike extra PFAS into the samples to get sort of a response into the plants and to see it there. Similarly, I think there have been a few documented cases where a particular industry was discharging to, let's say, a wastewater treatment plant and really affecting their biosolids or effluent by introducing high PFAS into that system. Then the application of those biosolids that are effluent to crops, you would see a higher level of uptake and transfer. And finally, it does appear that the short chain compounds are more amenable to uptake versus some of the legacy longer chain compounds as well. So that concludes my talk. I'm going to have, I think we're going to have Gina come on now, and she's going to close us out with just a little overview of kind of what our public communications outreach have been specific to PFAS. So Gina, I'll advance the slide for you.
Great, thank you, Jason. So just a couple of slides. Jason spoke really well to Orange County Water District's robust response to PFAS treatment, both in terms of policy and building these treatment plants to restore our drinking water supplies. So I'm going to touch a little bit about our communications response. And I think Mel, that was a great presentation. She really touched on an important topic, which is, for our outreach for the groundwater replenishment system, for example, we definitely we're doing a lot of the same components in our PFAS outreach that we did in our GWRS. So a lot of these outreach kind of goals and tactics can definitely be applied to a lot of different topics and issues that we're addressing in the water industry. So I think really key to OCWD's response, in addition to our policy and treatment, was forming a PFAS task force. So Jason talked about OCWD as a wholesaler. We have 19 water retailers. So we knew right on that when this issue came up, we wanted to be able to address it with one strong voice, having consistent messaging. So a PFAS task force was formed, and we met regularly, very often. We continue to meet today, not as frequent as early on. But in those task force meetings, we talked about all of the issues, came to consensus on all of the issues. And also we were able to develop materials and have review and input as kind of one body, which made definitely a stronger voice. And also just helped our customers to understand the issue if we were all talking about it in the same way. Our PFAS policy was also very important. It brought us all together because we were addressing it as an all-for-one approach. We responded, as Jason mentioned, with litigation, as well as early on launching the nation's largest testing pilot program right away to test treatment techniques. Oh, sorry, that's right. You're advancing it, Jason. We could go to the next. So communication and outreach goals. What were our goals? Definitely to be early and proactive. We wanted to tell our own story. We wanted it to get out there before the media, printed it, so that we were able to control the narrative. Develop clear and consistent messaging. So we were able to do so, as I said, because we formed that PFAS task group and we were all speaking with the same voice. Communicate frequently, and similar to our GWRS outreach, we communicated with everyone. I would say the one thing that changed with our communications and outreach in comparison to other projects is that we did have litigation. So definitely that did change the way that we communicated the process and how we did have to engage legal early, and we engaged them every step of the way. But we typically took any opportunity to communicate, anyone that emailed, and we would outreach to a lot of groups. Definitely wanted to get the message out there that we are aware of the issue, we are proactively addressing it on all fronts. And then we wanted to maintain public trust in our local water supply. So definitely touting the district's long water quality kind of record in maintaining high quality water that meets all federal and state standards. So how did we do this? These were our goals. How did we kind of execute some of the goals? Next slide, please. We approached media early to tell our story. So again, we made sure to collaborate with the 19 water retailers that we served. So early on, we approached the Orange County Register, which was one of the largest kind of papers in our community. And it was OCWD along with one of our producers who was largely impacted by PFAS, the Yorba Linda Water District. So we wanted to really send home to the reporter and to the community that we were addressing this problem together and that we were on it and that we were early and proactive. We developed a robust coalition of impacted agencies. So we looked at, whoever received monitoring orders, we compiled a huge database and we started sending out communications about what we're doing, how we're addressing the problem, in hopes that we could, share the resources and let folks know how we're talking about this issue, so that they too could use this and we could all share and collaborate together. And from there, it ended up that we formed kind of smaller working groups and networks where we were either able to work together to have common funding asks, fact sheets, or work together sometimes to have meetings with regulators or others so that we were kind of speaking as a larger voice. And then we held regular meetings of the PFAS task force, kept in constant communication when it came to any outreach and media and issues so that we could resolve them together. Next slide, please. Here's a sample of some of our communication assets that we use. You can go to our website today on ocwd.com, and we have a robust PFAS education center where we have fact sheets and FAQs. We try to share a lot of updates regarding our retailers that are coming online with these PFAS treatment plants and showing photos and videos. We also have press releases and FAQ about how did PFAS get into our water and what we're doing. And, all of the key messages really that are part of all of these tools is that, chemical manufacturers are the source of PFAS. PFAS is everywhere. Water is just one pathway. And water agencies did not cause this issue, but we are addressing it and we are ensuring that their water is safe to drink. So those kind of messages really resonate throughout all of the communication assets that we did. Another important communication tool that we used was our construction outreach toolkit. So Jason talked about that 31 treatment systems are being built throughout Orange County, trying to restore those 61 wells. So we had to make sure that we had a really robust communication strategy when it came to building treatment plants in those areas. And because it was an OCWD property where the treatment plants were built, we worked cooperatively with the impacted water retailer to develop a strategy that worked best for their customers, getting the message out so that they knew not only was this construction impact, but they also knew about PFAS, why we were doing this, and we really addressed questions ahead of time. We also have videos that we did, e-newsletter, and specific PFAS stakeholder updates, in addition to webinars, presentations, meetings, and events. Next slide, please. Legislative outreach was a huge component of our communication strategy and one that continues today. So we reached out to all of our elected officials from the local on up to the federal level, and we continue to do that to brief them on the significant issue that PFAS is in Orange County, to brief them on how much it is costing, And definitely to stress that, this problem, which is valued, I think, $1 billion or greater, that we don't want this passed on to the ratepayer. So we want to hold chemical manufacturers responsible, and we want to get an exemption for water and wastewater agencies. So that was a big part of our communication strategy as well, and one that we engaged with both state and national associations, trying to gain that exemption language and advocate for it, so it still continues to move forward. And then funding was the other ask that we did when reaching out to legislative folks. So this is a huge issue costing over $1 billion. We need help in getting money to address this because we don't want to pass it on to our ratepayers. Next slide, please. So ending just on our takeaways kind of for success so far: be proactive, tell your own story, definitely pivot when necessary, whether we had to address certain concerns in a community where a plant was being built, or certain stories in the media where we had to have responses to. Engage with legal, that's definitely was for us because we had litigation, and we currently have litigation. It was very important to engage legal, to meet with them, to make sure that they were approving of all of our materials as well. And then definitely to collaborate with others. So to get the word out about what we're doing, share best practices, learn from what others are doing, and then develop these kind of work groups and networks where we can come together and have a stronger voice. And then finally, just to keep communicating and don't take our foot off the pedal when it comes to PFAS. So I will end there. I know these presentations from Jason and Mel have been very informative. And if anyone has any questions, Mel, Jason, or I would be happy to take any at this time.
Thank you, Gina and Mel and Jason. Fantastic job. And wow, those were really informative presentations. And I think we all can say I've learned a lot from the work that you've done, the experiences you've had. There's a lot of compliments to you all in the chat, so please read through those. Lots of kudos. There is a question here. This is from Ryan, and he asks, what were some of the concerns you heard from the public and after you started the outreach, and how did you address them? And I think, Gina, that's for you.
Sure, I can start off and Jason can add to that definitely. Early on, I guess, let me think here, Jason. Some of the concerns we heard, of course, was just how did this get into my water? Is it safe to drink? And what are you doing about it? So I would say, especially in thinking back, Jason, when we started kind of our first outreach meeting for Serrano Water District, we were starting kind of with our construction outreach toolkit. And we were hosting a community meeting with Serrano Water District and their customers in Orange County Water District. And it really taught us that, we had gotten messaging out about PFAS, but it seems like the residents really just were, once we sent out that notification letter about a project being built and all of that, it really did make them pay attention at that moment, and they may have not received those materials and communications before. So when we had the construction meeting online, there was a lot less questions about the building of the plant and the cost, and a lot more just backing up to why are we even dealing with PFAS? How did this get into our water? Is it safe? What are the health concerns? So I think we really had to pause with that group in particular. We hosted another 1 or 2 future meetings because we just had to back up and kind of give a PFAS 101 for this group especially. So I think that was a valuable lesson that we learned. And Jason, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, Gina, I think the only thing I'd add to that, yes, certainly we found we need to be prepared to, sometimes answer some bigger picture questions from the public beyond just the maybe local construction project and talk about that. I think one thing I've been surprised by is sometimes on the flip side of that, we'll get residents and citizens coming to our meetings or otherwise. Somebody's questioning the whole premise for the project and like, gosh, are these really as hazardous as you're telling me, or as the state is telling me? This seems like an awful lot of money to be spending on this problem versus perhaps another large societal problem they perceive. And so I think that's maybe been the surprise to me is needing to be able to be equipped to to answer some of those type of questions in terms of trying to, justify what we're doing, the investments we're making, citing the state and federal advisories and pending, regulations, and even trying to explain to people what backstops those, like what are those based on? How are people coming to the realization, and the regulators, come up with really strict regulations for that. And so I think we've kind of been able to be able to learn to kind of speak to both constituencies, because we will get feedback from both, kind of both camps on that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you've gotten that, or why are you doing all this? I had a question the other day from somebody which caught me off guard too, which, we're all, and all these materials, everything that you're sharing today is really helping us prepare for most of the questions that come from the public, which is like, this is really scary, and what do we do about this? What are you doing about it? But the other day I got a question, and I want to open it up to all three of you, as well as to anyone else on this call, just like, what can I do to help about this? And it stumped me for a second because I wasn't expecting that. So I'd love to hear from all of you. What's a good call to action to the public if they want to do something to help?
I think Mel has good points that she could bring up as well in their outreach toolkit.
Yeah, I go back to just the education around that the use of these products is one of the primary drivers that we're dealing with this issue today. So what can you do is, use those resources that we have in the WRF One Water Toolkit. That's like, here are institutions that looked into PFAS present in products, so that you can be a more educated and active consumer, so you're not purchasing items that are getting into the waste stream. I think that's really the biggest action that we can take as a public, is not demanding these products that have created this problem.
Great. Thank you, Mel. Anyone else have anything to add? All right, great. And I don't see any other questions in the chat. If you do have a question, feel free to put into the chat, or just unmute yourself or raise your hand. All right, it looks like, Gina, I'm going to hand it back to you to move on with the agenda. Thanks to all of you again for just wonderful presentations.
Sure, and I will close that part out by just saying that, we definitely had questions and concerns along the way, and we continue to. And we also have, Orange County is actually the site for a national CDC funded PFAS health study. So folks are getting messages about, coming in and getting tested for PFAS in their blood and different things. And early on, Jason started working with, UCI, and we work with them as well to give input on all of the communication that goes out there. So I think one thing that we really learned is you really just have to monitor, have a really wide net, and monitor everything that is going on with PFAS in your community and what everyone is saying about it, and to try to get involved as much as you can, because the input we're giving to the UCI study has really informed how they are reaching out to people and making sure that they're not alarming people, and that they know their local water agencies are aware and have already been acting on it. So that's really been helpful to us in terms of just monitoring everything else, from social media to email to legislators' concerns, but being able to have that robust toolkit and to have other agencies in your network that are part of your coalition has been really valuable. So thanks again, Jason.